If you're watching this on borrowed time, to put it short, Battlefield has an identity crisis. It's clear that during development, DICE were at a crossroads, and instead of having a clear vision on what direction they wanted to go by picking just one, they took the time to do a drive-by on every single one of them, and then crashed on the way home. This video is not going to be covering the more technical issues that have kind of been plaguing this game's existence, but more so of the design choices and overall direction, or rather lack thereof, that this franchise seems to be heading in. Also, I did play on last gen, if that was anyone's concern, but most of the things we're going to talk about are not to do with the hardware capabilities.
I'm gonna fucking eat your kids!
So that's the intro. Battlefield, welcome to the Rehab Center. I'm Jordan. Please, follow me.
Identity theft is not a joke, Jim. Millions of families suffer every year.
2042 is definitely the biggest shakeup to the formula probably ever, and whilst change is absolutely necessary if implemented correctly, many of these celebrated mechanics that Battlefield has embraced for so many years have either been tweaked just for the sake of tweaking or removed entirely. And after the beta, deep under this bundle of videos talking about how broken the game was and why you should stay away from it, was this video by Bricky, titled Battlefield 2042 Identity Crisis. And he talked about certain aspects of the gameplay that were essentially copied from other games like tactical sprint, armor plates, the UI, the plus system, etc. And taking certain mechanics from other games is by no means a bad thing. Every franchise is guilty of it to some degree. But the reason why 2042 remains in question is because in regards to almost all of these mechanics, there is almost no desire to make them operate the slightest bit different to how they did in the games that they are mimicking. Tactical sprint not only feels like a very pointless inclusion, but also the animation for it is, as the developers for Overwatch 2 would say, is virtually the same to how it was in Modern Warfare. The same goes with armor plates, except you can just slot them in right on spawn, instead of having to find some like in Warzone. And speaking on the subject of Call of Duty, Tom Henderson, who is known to be this trusted EA insider slash leaker, posted a tweet a while back claiming that EA held a number of playtests with community members, and apparently one of which was a questionnaire comparing Battlefield 2042's overall design to Call of Duty's. Now, I didn't think much of that at the time, they're just words, there's no physical proof of that. But I'd like to add to the conversation because as I've been playing over the last month or so, I started to see many more noticeable references starting to stack up. Cutscenes before the beginning of a match, the aim down the sight's reload, the little gun animation that plays every time you respawn back in, stim packs, third-person takedowns, being able to cut and redeploy your parachute, and also a steering mode with an identical animation. Again, none of these things are necessarily bad additions, but they do sort of take on a slightly different meaning in the context of that supposed rumor. So okay, you want this to be a more easily accessible, lone wolf, ultimately unbalanced but still fun type of experience. That's absolutely fine, as long as all the design choices have a consistent pattern to confirm that. And are they?
No, son.
Exhibit A, aiming on a controller. Despite all of these new changes to make the game far more accessible, like faster health regeneration and more emphasis on solo play, all of a sudden Battlefield 2042 decides to make the gunplay and aiming very, very tedious. And from what I can tell, it's intentional. I mean, please tell me it wasn't that rushed out the gate that you didn't have enough time to perfect an aiming mechanic in a shooter game. Now I'm willing to take one for the team here with all these inevitable just get good comments, but even after making tweaks in the settings to my maximum satisfaction, the gunplay just doesn't feel like it's all there. I think the main problem with it is just its schizophrenic behaviour and no real counterplay to perform to overcome it. So the inconsistency within the gunplay is the aiming. When you engage with an enemy, sometimes you will snap right onto them and you'll kill them in a few bullets. And other times when it feels like there's just a magnet around it and it just feels like a scene from the Matrix. But let's start by not looking at this as a problem. Let's look at this as a hurdle that DICE have purposely put there for us to jump over. So, should you maybe switch to burst fire mode for medium, long range, distant fights?
No!
Because the majority of the weapons recoil even before unlocking all the attachments are super easy to control. Maybe shooting when standing still, crouched or prone to be more accurate.
No!
The gun behavior is exactly the same regardless of your stance. Have you simply just got to take your time to perfect your shots?
How about no?
Because the aiming pattern is very inconsistent, and they've also brought back random bullet deviation, and the netcode is pretty busted. Is it maybe using the most blatantly obvious best guns in the game?
Yes. 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 Yes.
For me, the gunplay just isn't satisfying enough, period. And I'd mainly put it down to just how bland and sloppy it feels, the few combinations you can perform, like something as cool as a grappling hook in 2042 just doesn't feel as good and as satisfying as it should. And the other bummer, and I think this is kind of going off a beaten path, while playing 2042 in the most efficient way you see fit, it just feels like something you've already played, which I know goes for many other games these days, I'm sure, but it's just not in a good way. And to top that, then you start to know that these mechanics have been done better in previous games, that nobody asked to be changed, does just leave me a little bit bewildered into what exactly they wanted to do with this new overhaul. The biggest factor, however, that plays a part in this new gameplay mindset is the specialist, which upon their first announcement, everybody was pretty much on the same page saying things like, "This is a terrible idea. Guys, please, what are you thinking? Go play Overwatch 2. Your mom's a hoe." I too said all of those things, and then some. The best I could hope for that was DICE would make tweaks to secure somewhat of a happy middle ground. And did they? No, they didn't. In fact, I don't even think they tried. I completely misinterpreted the whole system in the video I made months ago leading up to its release on how I thought they would work, and I was wrong, and I'm sorry. I thought it was going to be like in the previous two games you had, as well as your primary, secondary and 2 gadgets, you also had a third utility option. In Battlefield 1 you had a gas mask, in Battlefield 5 you had fortifications. I thought it would have been a massive step up for the system if 2042 placed the equipment slots there. Now you can actually choose between a select few options. I guess we would still have the issue of some being better than others, but what that does do is bring player freedom and the encouragement of team play closer together. Now you can fulfill both an offensive and supportive role. You can have more emphasis and flexibility to your combat role. I mean, judging by how this game was glorifying player freedom in the trailers, this is more what I expected it to be like. Now, if you have been playing with friends, I imagine you did select a good balance between the lot of you to sort of rekindle that classic squad play. But solo?
You are fucked.
To be fair, you do occasionally encounter coherent randoms who do drop supplies, repair your vehicle, or at least try and do their best to stick with you. And to those people, if you're out there, may your loved ones live for 100 years. But without a doubt, out of all the Battlefields I've played, these moments are rarer than ever in 2042. And unlike other hero-based shooters, where each character has a unique style of combat effectiveness that blends in with the gameplay, so if you're playing Overwatch and there's an enemy Mercy, it would probably be wise to prioritize that bitch first, because otherwise she might revive the whole team right after you've used your ultimate to wipe them all out. Or if you hear this sound,
It's high noon.
or in Apex Legends, if you've got an artillery barrage incoming, then Gibraltar, with his protective dome, will solve that. But hold on, we need to reposition here because we're sitting ducks once this dome deactivates. But hey look, your friend is playing Octane, who has a jump pad to launch you away, and look, problem solved. These games play out like a game of chess, where all the abilities interact with each other dynamically, and they don't interrupt the flow of combat, and you can turn the tide in your favour if you use it appropriately. Many of these specialist abilities in 2042, however, feel more like disruptions to the combat flow. Navin, for example, has the ability to spot all players within an area if he kills a player after hacking them. So what you have to do is spot an enemy, and providing he doesn't see you or is not going behind cover anytime soon, you can get your hacking device out, press hack, wait 2 seconds, get your gun back out and kill him, and boom. Was all that information that you've gathered from that worth it to you? Or maybe you could just throw a proximity sensor. Another ability he has is to disable weapons on tanks and helicopters, which could work with coordination. In the case of a helicopter coming over to show us what social media is doing to society, I can hack him, which leaves him unable to fire his weapons for 10 seconds. Unless you decide to do all the heavy lifting yourself by equipping an anti-air weapon, what ends up happening most of the time was the heli would just awkwardly float around for 10 seconds or dash away quickly and then come right back and do exactly what he was going to do 10 seconds prior. And look, there's room for discussion on the effectiveness of each specialist. I've watched a couple of in-depth guides by SMK who does a very good job at showcasing their effectiveness if utilised properly. But in the big picture, most players you see don't really use these characters in a team play manner because out of the 10 to choose from, there's only 5 that are kind of supportive roles, and that's being generous. The rest of them are just more solo themed. So unlike its counterparts, 2042 doesn't put enough emphasis on the specialist system to warrant players to use them in beneficial ways. And also little to no depth on how each character's abilities could interact with each other. Like Boris has a sentry turret that is just like it is in Modern Warfare, except you don't need to get a kill streak for it. And Navin can indeed hack that and disable it for 10 seconds, but the game could have spiced things up a bit where it would make the turret turn on his own team for a short time, adding a sprinkle of risk and reward rather than just effortlessly deploying effective equipment every time you respawn with little to no consequences. They did the usual half in, half out. It feels less like a game of chess and more just like a game of pile-ups, just one after the other with no sense of dynamic flow whatsoever. Almost like it was just a little sort of experiment, dipping their foot in the water and seeing if it would hurt. Like, if you're gonna make a drastic change to a well-established system that players have appreciated for a long time, and then not express it to its full potential, what exactly were you trying to do? And you know, maybe it'll turn out that way in the next game. Allegedly.
What happened to you, man?
Man, what the fuck do you care?
The final big examination I want to discuss is the overall tone, which is something I touched on in my Battlefield 5 video, and I attempted to drive home a point on how it seemed that the franchise was stepping away from that more dark and gritty tone to a more Marvel's universe glorifying chaos, but at the same time not self-aware about it. 2042's trailers sort of leaned into that same mindset, but this time it did feel self-aware. The reveal especially comprised of a series of pre-rendered cinematics of only in Battlefield moments that can indeed be achieved in-game. This felt like great fan service, and let's face it, it should be less about realism and just more about plain old fun. Then the intro cutscene plays.
We're preparing for yet another night without power.
Earlier in the week in parts of militaries to fortify their borders using...
At what point does a country stop being a country?
Man, this is some dark and desperate stuff here, man. Then we get to the game. Brace yourselves. I'm gonna play a few.
Spectacular.
Ooh, sorry.
Hard work pays off sometimes.
That's it? I'm ready for round 2.
DICE, you should be done for treason. I don't want to ever see you pulling this kind of sewage ever again. You understand me? Boy, have you lost your mind, because I'll help you find it. To think as well of how many loopholes this had to jump through to end up in the game. Like, first off, it's just in your imagination. Then you have like a private chat with 1 or 2 others about it. Then you pitch the idea. Then you have meetings about it. Then you make a prototype preview. Then you playtest it. And then it gets finalized. There was plenty of opportunity to talk this kind of stuff down, and it still made it all the way through to the final product.
Psychosis can describe a state of having a change in behavior, change in perception.
Now this is a squad I'm happy to be part of.
And I personally think it really shows how either the game directors and heads at DICE just were either super naive, or the team were just too scared to speak up about this, or both. You could have saved yourself a little tiny bit of dignity if there were customizable voice lines, because then at least we could look at it and say, okay, so the main focus of this inclusion is just perhaps to be another asset for a little bit extra revenue. But there aren't, so they must have just thought this was a pretty suitable addition to the game. And one other thing, I suppose, going back to what I was saying earlier, they've now changed the end round screens from showing best squad like it was in the previous 2 games, to now best individuals, which again, pretty much narrow it down on how solo play is more prioritized than squad play. If it's to be believed that the next game is in fact going to double down on these hero classes, which again, I'm taking with a little pinch of salt, pepper, garlic, and starch. If the development cycle remains the same, we're still 2 to 3 years away from it, and likely they're only going through the prototyping stages, but nonetheless, it would definitely, I think, be the final nail in the coffin for many long-term fans if 2042 wasn't already, for at least the Battlefield they knew. And to be fair, that game could go on to be good in its own ways, but just not in the ways we want. If you're gonna do that, go crazy with it. Like, keep the cringy one-liners, have silly cosmetics, and by all means, launch it half finished if you want. Just as long as it has a clear vision on what type of game you want to make, which I think is ultimately 2042's biggest problem, and that is that it touches on so many other mechanics that their counterparts found successful, and they had no desire to make them function or even feel any different or better. And yet they still tried to maintain a small dosage of that Battlefield formula that just didn't blend in well with this reformed gameplay and presentation. So what's left is a franchise that right now, from a creative point of view, just feels a little bit lost. If DICE and EA are serious about getting Battlefield back on top, the best thing I think they can do is simply just look back at their finest work and take little segments from what each game did better than each other and combine it all into one. I'm well aware that many of the devs that were at the center of those older games have moved on from the company, so there are questions to be asked on how deep the connection runs between the team and its legacy. id Software have proven that a new generation can indeed reinvigorate, so let's not act like it's impossible, and despite how disappointed I am, I must acknowledge that these people who worked on Battlefield 2042 worked very, very hard on this game in the time that they had, and they should be applauded for that. Unfortunately for both of us, it just missed its mark.
So handsome. No, I'm not ready! You look ready.
But they're really going to have a sit down on what to do next, considering these new tactical shooters like Hell Let Loose, Insurgency Sandstorm, Enlisted, World War III, and 6 Days in Fallujah, which, as well as on PC, are already making the jump, or already have made the jump, to consoles. And these games, by all accounts, have the capability to thrive and ultimately take a big bite out of these AAA audiences, with this massive accessibility increase. And I understand the kind of game that I'm asking the next Battlefield to be sounds almost impossible with how the current landscape of games operate, with more emphasis put on never-ending paid cosmetics rather than actual content, which in all honesty, I fully understand from a business perspective. If you're getting more in return for minimum effort, why would you change? Keep at it. I think regarding that issue, more fingers need to be pointed at the consumers rather than the developers and publishers on that matter. But that's a video for another day. But equally, as much as you can't stop this new era of corporate copy and paste following trends mindset, you also can't stop people from caring about what has been lost.